This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Beginning the show is Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel commenting on the cattle market experiencing a sharp historic downturn with live and feeder cattle futures plunging during mid-July. Rich Llewelyn, K-State Extension Assistant, keeps the show rolling as he previews the Risk and Profit Conference at K-State. We also hear from Ron Wilson with the Kansas Profile. K-State Wildlife Specialist Drew Ricketts concludes the show as he highlights research that has been done looking into what gray wolves are eating. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We begin the week with our regular check on the activity and trends taking place in the cattle market. This week's guest is Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel. Derrell takes a look today at the correction that's taking place in the cattle market and whether the end is almost in sight. Derrell, in terms of the markets, we are in what you would call a rather significant slide right now.
Yeah, the last couple of weeks have been a pretty serious pullback in the markets in terms of especially the future kind of leading the way, but cash markets as well. And, this is, I'm going to characterize this as a correction. I think it's partly seasonal. It's midsummer. It's kind of the summer doldrums. We're between, July 4th and Labor Day. So that's part of it, and maybe that was kind of what set this up. But it's beyond that. It's just a correction led by the futures market. But it looks to me like it's getting close to finding a bottom here. Additionally, kind of adding fuel to the fire here for this correction, box beef prices pulled back this past week pretty significantly. Again, I think that's mostly seasonal in nature. Obviously, we've been watching these, beef demand for a number of months now, really speculating on whether we would get to a point where we'd see significant pushback. But again, I don't think this indicates anything fundamentally different in beef demand. I think it's just a seasonal thing, the summer doldrums, if you will. And it's not uncommon if you look at the seasonal pattern for most of the beef cuts. We see a little pullback in the summertime here. So it's that plus a little bit more given this futures market correction that we're seeing.
So maybe to talk a little bit more in specifics, what are we seeing then in terms of the fed cattle market?
Cash fed cattle prices have pulled back again on the heels of a sharp decline in the live cattle futures. So I think there's a couple things going on. I mean, it's really, again, the futures market is mostly a technical correction. We've had such a long run of this bull market, and we've seen several corrections before. I think this is just the latest one, if you will. A long-term bull market, lots of people have these extended long positions, and they're looking for an opportunity to kind of take a little money off the table, maybe reset some of these positions. And so I think that's what we're seeing. It has spilled over into the cash market, and some of that's probably summer slowness again. Now, we've also seen, a lot of heat around the country here lately, and I'm hearing some stories that fed cattle coming out of feedlots are coming in lighter than expected because of the heat, which eventually should turn into a little bit of support for this market, relative to carcass weight. So, it's just, again, it's going to take a little time. I think we're in the middle of that process right now.
So we're still seeing that difference between the lightweight and the heavier weights?
Yeah, and, the feeder cattle markets as well. They picked back up. Actually, they had gone down, kind of going backwards here. If you look at where we were in April, May, into June, we were starting to see some pretty significant drought impacts on feeder cattle markets, at least in some parts of the country. And then we started getting some rain in a lot of places, and the feeder cattle markets, the lighter weight cattle in particular, picked back up pretty nicely, kind of counter-seasonally, because they're normally lower in the second half of the year anyway. But then now with this, with this correction in place, they've come back down again. It's all temporary. Numbers are not there to suggest any fundamental change in this thing. So, the heavier weight feeder cattle have come up relative to the lightweight feeder cattle. So if you look at that, which would be kind of a stocker margin kind of a thing, we've seen a little bit of improvement in that margin here in the last 3 or 4 weeks.
You mentioned boxed beef prices before. Will those rebound as well?
I think they will. Again, it may take a little bit longer here, perhaps another 2-3 weeks. We'll see some pressure on this market. We may be cleaning up some inventories. July 4th was the challenge. That was a big grilling holiday weekend, but we had a tremendous amount of hot weather that I think curtailed some activities. So we probably got backed up a little bit, if you will, short term in terms of the movement of beef was probably not quite as good as we had counted on. So part of this is fixing that. And another 2 or 3 weeks, we'll look ahead to the Labor Day holiday, and we'll see some buying because of that. So I look for this boxed beef market to bottom out, stabilize here anytime in the next few days, and then probably pick back up by the middle of August.
Is this maybe a little bit longer correction than what we would normally see?
It could be. It may take a little bit longer. Again, I think in part you could attribute that just to the time of the year. It's the summer doldrums here. And it's obviously we've been at record high prices. Everything, all of the cattle market, all of the cattle classes set record prices in the first half of the year. And the more we do this is a 3 to 4 year now bull market. And so the market gets increasingly nervous about how much higher we can go. The fundamentals tell me that we're not done going higher, but certainly the market starts anticipating at some point that we are going to peak out. I think we're quite a long ways away from that at this point, but the correction may take longer until people, kind of come to grips again with the realities of the fundamentals, particularly from a supply side, but also the demand side, and these markets will pick back up and continue the path that we've been on for about 3+ years at this point.
From a marketing standpoint, what would be maybe the next logical step for producers?
Producers here is sort of stick to your plan. I mean, certainly I would not panic in the midst of what we're seeing right here in July. It is a correction. So, and for some people, depending on what you're trying to do, this may be a short-term dip that's an opportunity for buying, whether it's a stocker thing or something else. So you take advantage of that because I don't think it will last all that long. At the same time, if you're a cow-calf producer, don't panic relative to this fall's markets. I think we'll be back on track here. Stick to your plans. If you're trying to expand, I think you still want to think about those things. If your conditions have improved, maybe from a forage standpoint, then, I would stick with those plans. I think we're still in this for quite a long time to come.
The slaughter figures through mid-year also down. Is there something that we can read into that?
Well, yeah, the slaughter is down for the year, and that's indicative of the broader or the longer-term market situation we're in. We have fewer and fewer cattle in the country. Cattle numbers are still getting tight, and so that's being reflected now with, reduced fed cattle production, and that translates into smaller slaughter. We're offsetting part of that with increased carcass weights. But beef production is down for the year, and that will continue not only for the rest of this year, but at this point in time, certainly through 2027, I expect to see smaller beef production.
What about in terms of imports and export numbers? Something that we should keep an eye on?
Pretty much continues as it has. Obviously, exports are down, really since 2022. That was the peak. We've been working our way lower, and we knew that would happen as we got into reduced supplies of beef in the U.S. and higher prices. The market works, and so we're not exporting quite as much. On the other hand, in some sense, I would argue that exports have held up relatively well, all things considered. And so, we're still exporting. The biggest impact we're seeing in the export markets last year and so far this year is really relates to the political tensions between the U.S. and China that continue here. And that was a big market for us. It was our third largest market as late as 2024. And now has dropped because of the tariff situation, the trade war situation that we have with them. But beyond that, the exports have held up pretty well. On the import side, again, imports are up for the opposite reasons. Beef production's down in the U.S., and in particular, supplies of non-fed processing beef. Cow slaughter has dropped so dramatically in the U.S., we're using more imported beef now to help maintain those processing beef supplies, largely for the ground beef market. And so we continue to see that. The sources that we're getting it from are changing a little bit because we've changed the tariff situation, for example, with Argentina. They're exporting a little more. They're a very minor source of imports, but they're exporting more than last year because of the tariff change that they received. But at the same time, we're also down in some of the big markets. Brazil, for example, is down so far this year. So for the most part, the market's getting all of the imported beef it wants, We're just, in some cases, shifting where it's coming from because of these changes in policy.
Are there any other factors that are impacting the cattle market right now?
I think we've covered the majority of it. Again, the supply and demand fundamentals continue to look very strong. Now obviously we're still watching the New World screwworm situation down in Texas at this point. That is not and has not ever been really a market situation. It's a huge impact on the people that have to deal with it directly, but it's not a market situation. I don't anticipate that it's going to become a market situation, even though we'll continue to monitor progress and trying to control this thing and those producers help them out individually. It's much like any other disaster. It gets dealt with on a local level, but it's not really a broader market impact.
So if I hear you right, it sounds like there is maybe a bright side beyond this correction then.
Looking at, we'll pick back up strength in the second half of the year or the last part of the year and through next year. I mean, in long-term projections, I expect 2026 prices to average higher over 2025. I expect them to go even higher in 2027. I don't think we're at the peak yet, and I'm not even sure it's then. It depends on whether we see any signs of herd expansion, any herd rebuilding that might go on. We will be receiving a mid-year cattle report here pretty soon. That may give us some indication of whether or not we've sort of turned the corner, if you will, on cattle inventories. But in any event, nothing's going to happen to change cattle inventories in 2026 and not much in 2027 at this point.
Well, as always, Derrell, we thank you for the update.
Yeah, you bet. Happy to do it.
That was Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel with information on the significant correction taking place in the cattle market. Derrell is a regular contributor to Agriculture Today. The program continues after the break. This is the K-State Radio Network.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing K-State's Risk and Profit Conference with K-State Extension Assistant Rich Llewelyn. Rich, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Rich, this is a long-time conference, but can you remind us, what is the Risk and Profit Conference?
Well, it has been going for 30 years now, and it's a conference put on by the Agricultural Economics Department here at K-State. It's kind of a showcase for some of the research and extension work that's going on in our department, and it's an opportunity for the faculty to present that to folks and also for them to interact with the participants here, which is a learning experience for both the faculty and the participants. So it's got general sessions as well as quite a few breakout sessions, and so it's a 2-day conference that happens in August each year.
And do you have kind of a theme for this year?
We do, going off of what the main speaker is going to be talking about: geopolitics, competition, and Kansas agriculture. And Greg Dowd is our general session keynote speaker for that, and he'll be talking about those things, looking ahead to 2030 and beyond.
And another important part of the Risk and Profit Conference, or personally one of my favorites, the featured producer, and who we'll be hearing from this year.
We have a family from Goodland, Kansas, this time in the northwest part of the state, Greg and Amy Setterstrom, and they have a farm out there, crops and some livestock, I believe, and so they'll be talking with Eric Atkinson on their operation and some of the things they're doing just in this rather difficult farming situation.
And a big part of this, the breakout sessions that will be taking place, and quite an extensive list this year. What are a few key ones you're seeing, Rich?
Well, we have more than we've ever had. We've got 28 different sessions going on, and folks would be able to choose from 8 of those. We have some stuff on policy, including government payments for row crops and some SCO and ECO crop insurance payouts. We also have the macroeconomic implications for agriculture by Brian Brigham. That's always popular. Alan Featherstone, our department head, will be looking at ag finance and some of the updates on that, just with what's going on in the farming world here. Price forecasts for both grain as well as inputs like fertilizer and diesel. And then there's some stuff on groundwater, on irrigation that's going on. We have several things going on in western Kansas, particularly related to that. We also have a few livestock topics on the beef side of things.
How do you feel like this whole conference comes together to support and teach people who do come to the Risk and Profit?
Well, like I said, it's a learning experience for everybody because our faculty can learn a lot from the producers and lenders and agribusiness folks that show up. But for them, it's some cutting edge research that we have going on in our department, some things that we're looking into and trying to figure out. And so it's helpful for them to understand what's being discovered and what's being learned here on campus, and then they can contribute to some of that learning process as well in the discussions we have in the breakout sessions.
For this conference taking place August 20th and the 21st, do people have to attend both days?
No, we have one-day registration, so they could come on Thursday. That would include the keynote speaker, Greg Dowd, who is a former trade representative, and he's also now the president and CEO for the National Milk Producers Federation, but I think he'll have some things on what's going on with the trade issues that we have, just his perspective. And then we'll have 5 breakout sessions that day. And then on Friday, we'll have the grain and livestock outlooks, as well as 3 breakout sessions and also the final session with the farm family that's featured.
And what are costs for this conference?
Well, if folks want to come for both days, it'd be $235, and that includes the conference and materials and meals and parking. If it's just for one day, that would be $200.
And you mentioned parking, an important aspect to mention. When we're talking about this conference, what do people need to know who are planning to attend?
Well, if they get there early enough, they can park right at the Alumni Center. There's some parking there that they won't need a permit for. We'll provide permits. But if they park in the parking garage across the street to the east or in the lot west of the old stadium, they'll have to bring their tag number so we can get that taken care of and get the permit settled.
If people are also planning to stay in Manhattan, are there some accommodations for them?
Well, the Holiday Inn is right across the street, and we have a room block there. That will close July 30th, so they need to get that in before that, but we have a conference rate for that. A little further away is the Doubletree in Manhattan, which is just a little cheaper. They would have to drive over, but that also works. So either one is a good facility.
Rich, if people are wanting to get registered or find out some more details, where can they do that?
Well, they could email me. My email is rvl, that's V as in Victor, so rvl@ksu.edu, or they could go to the agmanager.info website, and they'd be able to find the information there with our events.
Rich, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate talking to you.
That was K-State Extension Assistant Rich Llewelyn. If you're looking to find more information about the Risk and Profit Conference, you can do so by emailing him at rvl@ksu.edu or by going online to www.agmanager.info. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by Ron Wilson, Director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development.
This is Kansas Profile. I'm Ron Wilson, Director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at Kansas State University. Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam. That's part of the Kansas State song, and it's still true that bison, the American buffalo, can be found here in Kansas. Today we'll meet a rural Kansas family that is raising buffalo and providing high-quality buffalo meat to the public. It's today's Kansas Profile. Joe and Sean Rolfe are the founders and owners of Dry Creek Buffalo Ranch near the north-central Kansas town of Delphos. Sean is from Delphos, and Joe is from Wamego. They met in college at Concordia and were married. My husband had a heating and air business at Wamego, Rolfe said. He did a heating project for the Plumleys who raise buffalo, and he fell in love with the buffaloes, she said. He came home and said, "I want to raise buffalo." I said, "What?" Rolfe said with a smile. My dad was a Kansas fish and game biologist, and he loved buffalo, Sean Rolfe said. I've always been drawn to them. After seeing how the Plumley family raised buffalo, he figured his family could also raise buffalo on the Rolfe family ground near Delphos. In 2009, they moved back to Delphos and bought several head of buffalo from Plumleys. Over time, they began marketing the high-quality buffalo meat. Using the name of the waterway which runs through their property, the Rolfs named it Dry Creek Buffalo Ranch. They bought a food truck to market their buffalo burgers and other foods. Buffalo meat is tender, very lean, and nutrient-dense, Joe Rolfe said. You can get 20 to 25 grams of protein from a quarter-pound bison burger, she said. People who haven't eaten buffalo before tell us that the steaks are unreal, Sean said. They can cut them with a plastic fork, he said. Raising buffalo has been a learning experience. We started out fencing with T-posts, Rolfe said. Now we use electrified high-tensile wire, he said. Buffalo have a strong herd instinct. They tend to stay in family units, so the mothers, daughters, and calves tend to stay together, he said. They do need access to mineral licks. Most of the time they are docile. Ours are fed grass only, Rolfe said. We don't need to supplement them in the winter. The buffalo are harvested at age 2 or 3 years for best quality. The Rolfes feel they have excellent support from other buffalo breeders. The National Bison Association and Kansas Buffalo Association have been great, Rolfe said. People like the Plumleys or Ed Dillinger are really willing to help. Rolfe shared the example of when he had a question about one of his animals that was sick. I called the National Bison Association about a sick buffalo, Rolfe said. Within 10 minutes, the head vet from Wyoming was on the phone with me, he said. The Rolfes take their food truck to various events around the region. When we started, our kids were in high school, Rolfe said. Now the kids are grown and gone. Their oldest daughter is in Manhattan, the younger daughter is in Kansas City, and the son is in Oldsburg. David Kaiser helps on the ranch, and high school students provide help in summer and on weekends. We want to get out as much as possible, Rolfe said. We'll take the food truck to festivals, fairs, auctions, and other events. We want to sell our meat to everybody, he said. One service that the Rolfes provide is taking their food trucks to small communities that don't have a cafe or a restaurant. We love the small towns, Rolfe said. That is fitting given their location. Dry Creek Buffalo Ranch is near the rural community of Delphus, population 302 people. Now that's rural. For more information, search for Dry Creek Buffalo Ranch on Facebook. As the Kansas State song says, buffalo still roam in Kansas. We commend Joe and Sean Rolfe and all those involved with Dry Creek Buffalo Ranch for making a difference by using these remarkable animals and providing high-quality meat. It's good to be in rural Kansas where the buffalo roam. For the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development, this is Ron Wilson with Kansas Profile.
We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show discussing great wolves with K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts. Drew, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Shelby.
Drew, wanting to talk about a new study from UC Davis that looks at the diet analysis of gray wolves, and how did they go about doing this research?
Yeah, so this is a really cool study that uses a very modern approach to look at the diet of a carnivore species in an area where livestock production is really important. And so the research team, which also included some ranchers who were involved in cattle production activities, collected carnivore scats. They wanted to make sure that they collected all potential wolf scats. And so they didn't try and differentiate between scats that might have been from wolves or coyotes or bobcats or mountain lions. So they actually used DNA analysis to identify the source of all the scats that they collected. So they collected something like 380 scats. And through that DNA analysis, they whittled that down to about 100 scats that they could confirm that were from gray wolves. They also used DNA analysis to identify how many individuals they collected samples from. So there were at least 20 individuals that they could differentiate. They could also tell if they were male or female. And then they used DNA analysis to break down the composition, the different kinds of critters and other potentially plant material and that sort of thing that the wolves were eating to look at their diet.
What did they see that these wolves were eating?
So one of the very interesting things that they found was in this region of northeastern California that wolves have recently reoccupied, cattle were actually the most common food item. And I guess the other thing that's important to say is that they collected these scats during the May to October grazing season in the area when cattle were actually out on range. Over 70% of the wool scats that they collected had cattle in them. Mule deer was the second highest food item in terms of percent occurrence in the diets, but they also ate a lot of things that I don't necessarily think about wolves as being a major consumer of. Pocket gophers, mountain voles, deer mice. And so there is some overlap between those small mammal prey sources that coyotes like to eat too. And so that's just kind of an interesting thing that I saw in this study.
What application do you see this having for Kansas?
When we think about many of the places that wolves have been either reintroduced or recolonized, they tend to be places that have robust, large ungulate or like large cervids. So critters in the deer family. And so we have moose, lots of elk, multiple deer species, potentially both mule deer and whitetails. And a lot of the diet studies on wolves from those areas have shown that cattle were a pretty small percentage of the food items and overall diet of wolves in those areas. Kansas is a lot more like this region of Northern California where this study was conducted in that we don't have robust populations of elk. There's some isolated herds within the state and a few wandering individuals, but not very many. We don't have moose. We do have abundant white-tailed deer, which is very different from this area in California where that study was conducted. And we also have mule deer in parts of western Kansas. So when we're thinking about the potential ramifications on livestock production for our producers of wolves recolonizing Kansas as, dispersing individuals from other populations like the recent reintroduction in Colorado, this study gives us a sort of picture of what could happen here. It could be that wolves might be making their living off cattle a lot more here than they are in other places where there are lots of other critters that they might want to eat. And so this is something for us to think about, something for us to be aware of, that we may have different challenges from, Idaho or Wyoming or Montana, some of these other states where wolves have had less of an impact on livestock producers.
That was K-State Wildlife Specialist Drew Ricketts. That's what we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.